The cruelest people always assume your silence means you have no power. My ex-husband Ethan learned that lesson in a ballroom full of witnesses. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier, embossed cream cardstock with gold lettering, announcing the Bennett Foundation Winter Gala at the Fairmont in downtown Chicago. I almost threw it away. Technically, I still received certain family-related correspondence because some paperwork from the divorce had once required shared notification records, though most of that had long since been resolved. I told myself I wouldn't go. Then I told myself I didn't care enough to stay away. Funny how both things can be true at once. The ballroom looked exactly the way wealthy people think respect should look. Crystal chandeliers, polished marble, string music drifting through conversations about venture capital, charitable boards, and vacation homes in places where winter never existed. I stood near the entrance for exactly 11 seconds before I saw Ethan. Some people change after success. Ethan became a sharper version of what he had always been. Expensive tuxedo. Controlled smile. The kind of confidence that comes from being surrounded by people who benefit from agreeing with you. Beside him stood Vanessa Cole, younger, glamorous, perfectly styled, the type of woman who knew how to scan a room and instantly rank everyone in it. Her hand rested lightly on Ethan's arm, like she had won something. Maybe she thought she had. I could have left. I should have left. Instead, Ethan saw me. His expression shifted into something dangerously amused. "Claire," he said, loud enough for several nearby conversations to pause. "Well, this is unexpected." Vanessa turned toward me, her smile polite in the way that wasn't polite at all. "Oh," she said. "This is Claire." "Not who?" "This." Ethan stepped closer. "Did someone invite you?" A couple nearby exchanged looks. I kept my expression neutral. "Good evening, Ethan." "That doesn't answer the question." Vanessa gave a soft laugh. Maybe she just misses the social calendar. A few people smiled. Small smiles. The kind people wear when they're relieved the humiliation belongs to someone else. I should tell you something important. 2 years earlier, this moment would have destroyed me. Back then, I would have apologized just for existing in the wrong place. I would have questioned whether I had made some terrible mistake by showing up. But grief changes shape when it survives long enough. Ethan tilted his head. "You always did have trouble letting go." "That's an interesting interpretation," I said. "Interpretation?" he replied. "Claire, you spent years attaching your entire identity to my life." Vanessa glanced at me with open curiosity now, like watching a drama she hadn't expected with dessert. More people were listening. Ethan knew that. That was the point. "Ethan," I said quietly, "this isn't necessary." "No." His smile widened. "I think honesty is healthy." There it was. The version of him I remembered most clearly. Not angry. Not emotional. Calm cruelty always wore him best. "You know what's amazing?" he continued. "Even after everything, you still show up where you don't belong." The sentence landed exactly how he intended. A small silence opened around us. Then Vanessa leaned in just enough to add, "Some people confuse history with entitlement." I looked at her, then back at Ethan. "Are you finished?" He laughed. "Actually, no." He raised his hand slightly toward a staff member across the room. "Security may need to help with a misunderstanding." That got attention. Conversations around us thinned into near silence. My heartbeat stayed steady, which surprised even me. Ethan studied my face, probably waiting for embarrassment, panic, maybe tears. Instead, I simply looked at him. Really looked at him. The man who once told me I was impossible to love. The man who left when success made him believe loyalty had become optional. The man who thought public humiliation was proof of strength. Then a familiar male voice behind me said, calm and unmistakable, "That won't be necessary." Ethan turned. So did Vanessa. So did half the room. And for the first time that night, Ethan's confidence cracked. The voice behind me belonged to Daniel Hayes. Ethan recognized him immediately, which was impossible to miss because the smug certainty on his face shifted into something far less comfortable. Daniel was not the kind of man who needed to raise his voice to control a room. Mid-40s, impeccably composed, tailored navy suit, the kind of presence that suggested he had spent years in rooms where decisions moved money, companies, and reputations. He stepped beside me with calm precision and offered a polite nod to the staff member Ethan had tried to summon. "There is no issue here," Daniel said. The staff member hesitated, then retreated with visible relief. Vanessa looked between the two men. "Ethan, she." said softly, "Who is this?" Ethan ignored her. "Daniel. Just his name. Tight. Controlled." Daniel offered the kind of professional smile that gave nothing away. "Good evening." Ethan recovered quickly, because men like Ethan always believed recovery was the same thing as control. "I did not realize you were attending." "I was invited," Daniel replied. His glance shifted briefly toward me, along with Claire. That changed the temperature in the room. I could feel it, not because anyone understood the story, but because they understood hierarchy, and Daniel clearly occupied one Ethan respected. Vanessa straightened slightly. "Claire knows Daniel?" she asked. Interesting wording. Not Daniel knows Claire. As though my existence required explanation. Daniel answered before I could. "Quite well." Ethan's jaw tightened so subtly most people would have missed it. I did not. "Excuse us," Ethan said, forcing a smile that looked expensive and brittle. "I would like a private word with Claire." "No," I said. "One word. Calm. Final." That unsettled him more than anger would have. "Claire," he said in a lower voice, "do not be dramatic." Daniel's expression did not change, but I saw the slight narrowing in his gaze. Ethan had always hated when I said no. During our marriage, no was treated less like a boundary and more like a misunderstanding to be corrected. "We are fine," I said. Vanessa folded her arms delicately. "This seems awkward." "Only for people who create awkward situations," I replied. Her expression froze for half a second. Tiny victories matter. Ethan gave a dismissive laugh meant for the audience still pretending not to watch. "You always did enjoy performance." I almost smiled. That was the irony. Ethan believed I had arrived to perform, when in truth he had been performing from the moment he saw me. Daniel offered me his arm. "Shall we?" he asked. I accepted, and we walked away under the weight of 100 speculative glances. Once we reached a quieter corridor outside the ballroom, Daniel exhaled. "You handled that well." "I considered setting the building on emotional fire," I said. He almost smiled. "That would have generated paperwork." "You hate paperwork." "Deeply." For a moment, the tension eased. Then silence returned. "I did not know Ethan would be that reckless," Daniel said. "You did not know Ethan when he feels publicly threatened." "I know enough now." We continued toward a smaller reception lounge where the noise of the gala became distant enough to think. Daniel handed me a glass of sparkling water from a tray. "Do you want to leave?" he asked. "No." He studied me for a moment, making sure I meant it. "All right." I looked down at the glass, then back at him. "Thank you." "For what?" "Intervening before I became a cautionary social media clip." "You would have survived that too." "Maybe. But survival and dignity are not always the same thing. The truth is, Daniel knew more about my life than Ethan ever had. Not because of romance. People love inventing romance whenever a competent man helps a woman. Reality is usually less convenient and more interesting. Daniel first entered my life 14 months after my divorce, during the most humiliating season I had ever endured. Ethan and I had been married for 11 years. Long enough to build habits, private jokes, holiday traditions, and the dangerous illusion that longevity guarantees loyalty. When we met, Ethan was ambitious in the charming way ambition can look when it still wears uncertainty. We were both in our early 30s in Chicago, trying to build adult lives that looked more stable than they felt. He had startup ideas. I had a solid operations role at a healthcare consulting firm and a practical understanding of budgets, timelines, and the difference between confidence and actual execution. In the beginning, we were a team. I believed that completely. I worked full-time while Ethan built his company. There were months when my paycheck carried nearly everything. Rent, insurance, groceries, utility bills. There were years when vacations meant a weekend in Milwaukee instead of somewhere glamorous because every extra dollar went back into his business. I did not resent that. That is important. Sacrifice is not tragic when it is mutual. I edited investor decks at midnight, helped rehearse presentations, hosted dinners for potential partners in our 2-bedroom condo, while pretending our folding dining chairs were intentional design choices. When his first major deal closed, he cried in our kitchen. He held my face in both hands and said, "We did this." I believed him. Success did not change overnight. It scaled. Slowly at first, then all at once. Better clients. Industry press. Invitations. New circles. Better tailoring. Better watches. New vocabulary. People started introducing me as Ethan's wife instead of Claire. Strange how identity can disappear politely. At first, I told myself it was temporary. Pressure, stress, growth. Then came the corrections. Do not tell that story. It makes us sound small. Maybe let me handle this conversation. You do not really understand this space. Small sentences. Clean cuts. Death by refinement. By year 10, Ethan had become extraordinarily skilled at making me feel unsophisticated in the life I helped finance. The divorce conversation happened on a Tuesday in our kitchen. No shouting. No shattered dishes. Just precision. I think we want different things now, he said. That sentence should be illegal. It sounds mature while saying almost nothing. I remember asking whether there was someone else. He paused just long enough to insult me. That is not the point. Which meant yes, even if not technically yet. 3 months later, photos surfaced of Ethan at a Hamptons event with Vanessa. Public enough to be seen. Private enough to avoid explanation. Friends chose neutrality, which usually favors the person with better catering. My former mother-in-law, Margaret, sent a handwritten note that said, "Sometimes marriages simply run their course." As if 11 years were expired yogurt. The divorce settlement was legally fair on paper. Emotionally, paper rarely tells the whole story. I signed because I wanted out before bitterness became my permanent address. Then came the rebuilding phase no one glamorizes. Quiet apartments. Relearning grocery habits for one person. Crying in parking lots for absurd reasons like seeing a cereal Ethan liked. Discovering that loneliness has a schedule. Then 6 months later, I found something Ethan never knew existed. A document among old financial archive materials I had boxed and forgotten. One detail. One inconsistency. One truth that changed everything, though not in the way revenge stories usually pretend. That discovery is what eventually brought Daniel into my life. Not by chance. Not socially. Professionally. Strategically. Carefully. And Ethan, standing in that ballroom tonight, still had absolutely no idea. The document I found was not dramatic at first glance, which is how consequential things usually hide. It was a financial archive summary from Ethan's early company years, buried in an old storage box I had nearly donated during a spring cleaning binge fueled by equal parts caffeine and emotional denial. I almost threw it away. Then I noticed a familiar account reference tied to an advisory equity allocation I did not remember ever being formally resolved. At first, I assumed it was outdated paperwork. Then I reviewed more files. Then more. Patterns emerged. Not illegal, not scandalous, but incomplete. Inaccurate in ways that mattered. Ethan had built his success story around a narrative of solitary genius and strategic grit. Reality had more footnotes. I did not rush into confrontation because pain can make people reckless, and reckless people usually lose. Instead, I contacted a corporate attorney through a former colleague. That attorney was Daniel Hayes. Our first meeting happened in a conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and expensive printer toner. I expected legal indifference. Daniel surprised me by asking precise questions instead of performative sympathy. "What outcome do you want?" he asked after reviewing the documents. I remember staring at him because no one had asked me that in a long time. "I do not know yet," I admitted. "Good," he said. "Unclear motives make cleaner decisions than revenge fantasies." I almost disliked him immediately. Then he explained what the documents actually suggested. Years earlier, when Ethan's company had been fragile and underfunded, structural contributions tied to operational development and strategic continuity had been represented one way privately and another way publicly. Translation: the story Ethan told investors, peers, and eventually even himself was cleaner than the truth. Daniel was careful. "This is not a cinematic corporate conspiracy," he said. "But there may be unresolved leverage depending on documentation and timelines." Leverage. Such a cold word for something emotionally volcanic. Over months, we reviewed records, agreements, communication history, archive drafts, and advisory notes I had unknowingly helped shape during the marriage. The irony would have been funny if it had not been so personal. I had contributed more than emotional support and unpaid editing. I had influenced operational systems, partner communications, and foundational processes during the company's unstable years. Not as an official executive, not as a formal co-founder, but enough to complicate certain narratives Ethan preferred. Why did he never disclose this properly? I asked once. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Some people edit history gradually until the edited version feels true. That sentence stayed with me. Still, I never wanted to destroy Ethan. That matters. People assume women in stories like this secretly crave revenge every waking moment. Mostly, I wanted acknowledgement. Clarity. Closure that did not taste like humiliation. Daniel negotiated quietly through appropriate channels over time. Some matters remained dormant, strategically unresolved, pending documentation review. Ethan either underestimated the issue or chose to ignore it. Likely both. Then tonight happened. Tonight, Ethan did something profoundly foolish. He turned a private imbalance into a public event. He recognized you with Daniel immediately, I said in the reception lounge. That bothered him. Daniel nodded. Because he knows my firm has standing knowledge of matters he hoped would remain background noise. So he knows something. He knows enough to be nervous. Not enough to be careful, apparently. I glanced toward the ballroom entrance. Vanessa looked confused. Vanessa probably knows the polished biography. The heroic founder version. Those are always popular. Before I could answer, a junior event coordinator approached Daniel, visibly anxious but polite. Mr. Hayes, the board chair is asking whether you will still be joining the donor recognition segment. Daniel looked at me. That depends. I understood the question beneath the question. Leave now, and Ethan's version of the evening calcifies. Stay, and the board remains in play. We stay, I said. The coordinator smiled with relief and hurried away. Daniel studied me carefully. Are you certain? No, I said truthfully. But certainty is overrated. As we returned toward the ballroom, my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number appeared. One sentence. We should talk privately before this gets worse. Ethan. I showed Daniel. He barely glanced at it. That took less time than expected. He thinks control can still be recovered. Can it? He asked. I looked through the ballroom doors just as Ethan turned and saw us returning. His expression shifted from guarded to calculated. Not the version he wants, I said. The moment Daniel and I stepped back into the ballroom, I understood something important about public humiliation. It only works when the audience agrees with the script. Ethan had written one version of the evening in his head. The unstable ex-wife appears where she does not belong, causes discomfort, gets quietly removed, and everyone returns to dessert believing his version of history. But scripts collapse when new characters walk on stage with information the lead actor did not anticipate. The donor recognition program began 10 minutes later. A temporary stage had been set near the far side of the ballroom beneath a projection screen cycling through charitable initiatives and sponsor acknowledgments. Wealthy people love generosity when it comes with branded lighting. Daniel was called forward with several other contributors and advisory board partners. His presence drew immediate attention, especially from those who recognized his firm. I remained near the rear with a clear view of the room. Ethan stood across the ballroom speaking in low, controlled tones with two board members. Vanessa hovered nearby, visibly trying to decode a situation she had not been briefed on. Then my phone vibrated again. Ethan, we need to speak now. I ignored it. 30 seconds later. Do not make this bigger than it has to be. That almost made me laugh. Men who create explosions often become passionate advocates for calm once the smoke drifts toward them. Margaret Bennett arrived just before the speeches began. My former mother-in-law wore emerald silk, immaculate posture, and the expression of a woman who believed discomfort should be handled privately and elegantly. She spotted me almost immediately. Her pause was subtle but unmistakable. Then she approached. Claire. Margaret. She glanced toward the stage, then back at me. I was not aware you would be attending. That seems to be a popular observation tonight. Her lips tightened almost imperceptibly. I heard there was an unpleasant moment. Remarkable phrasing. Not Ethan caused an unpleasant moment. Merely that one had occurred, like weather. There was an attempted one, I said. Claire. That warning tone. Familiar. This does not need to become something larger. Interesting. Ethan texted something similar. Then perhaps he is being sensible. I held her gaze. Was he sensible when he tried to have me removed? Margaret exhaled softly. Emotions run high in social situations. For security staff too, I assume. You always did lean toward dramatization. There it was. Legacy behavior. Revisionist family diplomacy. I almost admired the consistency. Margaret, I said evenly. If your son wanted peace, he should have started with manners. She studied me more carefully then, perhaps noticing something that had changed beyond wardrobe and posture. You seem different. That tends to happen after betrayal and paperwork. Before she could answer, applause began for the recognition segment. Daniel stepped to the podium for a brief acknowledgement as a strategic donor advisor. Professional, controlled, brief. Then the board chair, Leonard Pierce, unexpectedly added, and we are especially grateful for several guests whose quiet contributions often happened behind the scenes. His glance swept the room, including individuals whose operational support has strengthened philanthropic initiatives connected to this organization over many years. His eyes landed on me. A gesture, small, but public. Ethan saw it. So did Margaret. So did Vanessa. The applause was polite, but the implications were louder. Margaret turned toward me. What exactly is happening? A normal evening, I said. I thought we were avoiding dramatization. Across the room, Ethan excused himself from his conversation and moved toward us. Fast, but not rushed. Controlled urgency. Mother, he said, then looked at me. Claire. A word. You seem fond of that phrase tonight. His jaw flexed. Privately, Margaret intervened. I think that would be wise. I do not, I said. Ethan lowered his voice. Enough. Such a simple word, loaded with old assumptions. I smiled faintly. That used to work better. Vanessa arrived seconds later, all polished confusion. Can someone tell me what is going on? Ethan did not answer immediately, which was answer enough. Vanessa looked at me. Should I be concerned? That depends how attached you are to curated biographies, I said. Claire. Ethan snapped quietly. Margaret stiffened. Vanessa blinked. Curated what? Daniel approached then, timing so precise it almost looked choreographed. Everything all right? Ethan's smile returned with visible effort. Perfectly. Personal misunderstanding. Daniel's tone remained neutral. Those can become expensive. Vanessa turned toward Ethan sharply. Expensive. Ethan ignored her. Daniel, I would appreciate boundaries. I respect boundaries, Daniel said. That is rather the point. Ethan's composure thinned. Whatever concerns exist are historical and professionally immaterial. Daniel tilted his head slightly. That is a confident characterization. Vanessa looked between them again. Ethan, what is he talking about? Nothing relevant. Wrong answer. Vanessa folded her arms. That usually means something is very relevant. I should probably admit that I did not dislike Vanessa as much as I expected to. She was vain, yes. Socially sharp, certainly. But not stupid. And not eager to look foolish in public. Claire, Ethan said, his voice dropping lower. If you have orchestrated this. Orchestrated what? Your choices. Do not do this here. You started this here. Silence. Delicious, brief silence. Then Leonard Pierce approached with the strained smile of a man who preferred donor tension to remain abstract. Ethan, quick question about the East Foundation pledge scheduling. Also, Daniel, when you have a moment. Ethan nodded too quickly. Leonard noticed the tension immediately, because anyone with functioning eyesight would have. Everything all right? Of course, Ethan said. Vanessa spoke at the exact same moment. Apparently not. Leonard made the universal expression of a wealthy board chair regretting social oxygen. He retreated with diplomatic efficiency. Ethan looked at Vanessa. Please. No, she said quietly. You do not get to tell me nothing while everyone else clearly knows something. Margaret stepped in. This is neither the time nor place. Vanessa laughed once, humorless. That seems to be the family slogan. I almost respected her for that. My phone vibrated again, but this time it was not Ethan. It was a message from Daniel's associate who had been remotely reviewing archived material. One line. Additional correspondence confirmed. Date overlap significant. I looked up at Daniel. He understood immediately from my expression alone. Ethan noticed that exchange. What? He demanded. Nothing relevant, I said, borrowing his phrase. His face hardened. Claire, if you think dredging up old paperwork gives you leverage, leverage. Vanessa repeated. Paperwork. Margaret looked sharply at Ethan now. Interesting. That reaction told me she knew less than I assumed. Ethan, she said carefully, what paperwork? He exhaled through his nose. Administrative nonsense. Daniel spoke for the first time in nearly a minute. That is not how I would classify it. Ethan turned toward him fully. Stay out of my personal life. I am not in your personal life, Daniel said calmly. I am adjacent to your documented decisions. That landed. Vanessa stepped back slightly, reassessing the entire evening in real time. Margaret's posture tightened into old money panic. Ethan looked at me with something new in his expression. Not superiority. Not irritation. Concern. Real concern. Because for the first time, he understood there was a conversation happening around him that he did not fully control. And then the final shift arrived. Leonard returned, this time with a member of Ethan's own executive advisory circle, Thomas Reed, who glanced between all of us before looking directly at Ethan and saying, perhaps louder than intended, "We need to discuss the archive disclosures tonight. If there is one universal truth about powerful people, it is this. They do not fear embarrassment nearly as much as they fear uncertainty." The moment Thomas Reed said the words archive disclosures, Ethan's expression changed in a way I had never seen before. Not anger, not arrogance. Calculation interrupted by genuine instability. Thomas was not a dramatic man. Late 50s, measured, operationally disciplined, the type of executive who probably color-coded his calendar and mistrusted adjectives. If he had chosen this moment to speak, something had shifted beyond Ethan's private management. "Thomas," Ethan said in a tone so controlled it almost sounded gentle, "now is not the time." Thomas glanced at the surrounding faces and seemed to realize how public his timing had become. I would disagree. Vanessa went completely still. Margaret looked personally offended by the existence of spontaneous truth. Leonard Pierce cleared his throat with the fragile optimism of a man hoping reality could be postponed with etiquette. Perhaps a private room would be appropriate. "Excellent idea," Ethan said immediately. "No," Vanessa said. It was almost impressive. Ethan turned sharply. "Excuse me." I said no. Her voice remained calm, but the polished social softness was gone. "If there is some issue involving finances, legal concerns, archive disclosures, and apparently your former wife and an attorney, I would prefer not to be treated like decorative furniture." Margaret inhaled through her nose. "This is not your concern." Vanessa smiled without warmth. "Then why am I standing in the middle of it?" Thomas looked deeply regretful about having entered a social ecosystem with emotional weather. Daniel remained composed, saying nothing. He understood something Ethan never fully appreciated. Silence creates vacuum, and vacuum makes anxious people fill space with revealing mistakes. Ethan stepped closer to Vanessa. "This is legacy administrative review. Nothing more." "That is your third version of nothing," she replied. "I am noticing a pattern." I almost liked her. Almost. Leonard tried again. "Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps discretion." "Leonard," Thomas interrupted. "This concerns governance history tied to representations that may affect ongoing review. I strongly suggest minimizing improvisation." That sentence landed like a dropped crystal glass, not because it was loud, but because everyone within earshot understood enough corporate language to know it meant trouble. Not scandal, perhaps, but trouble. Ethan looked directly at me then, and for the first time all evening, I saw the truth. He did not believe I was emotional anymore. He believed I was dangerous. "Claire," he said quietly, "what exactly have you been doing?" "Breathing. Healing. Reading documents. Basic adult activities." Margaret closed her eyes briefly as if I were the exhausting one. Ethan ignored the remark. "You involved Daniel's firm." "I consulted legal counsel." "Based on what?" "Based on facts. Selective interpretation." Daniel finally spoke. "That accusation tends to weaken when documentation expands." Ethan turned toward him. "You are enjoying this far too much." Daniel looked genuinely puzzled. "I bill by the hour, not by emotional satisfaction." Thomas almost smiled despite himself. Vanessa stared at Ethan. "What did you do?" "Nothing improper." "Wrong wording again." She caught it immediately. "That is not the same as nothing." Margaret stepped closer to Ethan. "Please tell me this is administrative overstatement." He hesitated. "Tiny. Fatal." "Mother, not now." She looked almost insulted by the deflection. "Good. Let reality make new friends." Leonard, clearly deciding the ballroom was no longer a survivable venue for ambiguity, suggested the executive lounge upstairs. This time, everyone agreed. Well, almost everyone. I remained where I was. Ethan noticed. "You are coming." Not a request. Old reflex. I met his gaze. "Try that sentence again." Silence. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa watched like a woman discovering her engagement photos may have been staged in a museum of lies. Ethan recalibrated. "Claire, given your involvement, it would be helpful." "Better. Not much, but better." Daniel looked at me. Your choice. That mattered more than anyone there understood. Choice. Such a simple thing. So I went. The executive lounge upstairs was quieter, colder, and aggressively tasteful. Leather seating, dark walnut paneling, city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Chicago glittered beyond the glass like a city pretending everyone inside deserved to feel important. Once the door closed, the social theater changed. No audience. No applause. Just consequence. Thomas opened with ruthless efficiency. Additional archived correspondence surfaced tonight through document reconciliation tied to historical advisory review. Ethan leaned against the back of a chair, arms crossed. You make it sound criminal. I make it sound documented. There was no wrongdoing. Daniel spoke evenly. The issue is not wrongdoing in the cinematic sense. The issue is whether contribution narratives and advisory acknowledgments materially diverged from internal records. Vanessa sat slowly. English, please. I answered before anyone else could. His public origin story is cleaner than the truth. Ethan looked at me sharply. You do not understand corporate structuring. I almost laughed. I helped structure your first 3 operating workflows. Support functions. Strategic continuity. Thomas corrected, glancing at archived summaries. Ethan looked annoyed. This is absurd. Daniel folded his hands. Is it? Margaret looked between us. Someone explain this in plain language immediately. Thomas did. Clinical. Precise. During Ethan's early company phase, undocumented or underrepresented strategic contributions, advisory assumptions, and narrative simplifications had created discrepancies between actual operational development history and later representations. No fraud. No handcuffs. No dramatic federal raid. But enough governance discomfort to trigger review, especially if linked to recognition, attribution, or disclosure obligations. Margaret turned toward Ethan. You told everyone you built it independently. I built the company. With help, I said. That is not the same thing. Ethan looked at me with visible frustration. This is about recognition? No money. No, then what? Strange how he could spend 11 years married to me and still ask that question sincerely. Truth, I said. Respect. Accuracy. Pick one. Vanessa spoke quietly from across the room. Did you lie? Ethan exhaled. I simplified. That is corporate for yes, she replied. Thomas intervened. To be fair, narrative simplification is common. That is somehow worse, Vanessa said. You all have a phrase for it. Daniel almost smiled. Ethan moved closer to me, lowering his voice. You could have addressed this privately. I held his gaze. I did. Through proper channels. Quietly. For months. You ignored it. His jaw tightened. Because it was exaggerated. Because I was easy to dismiss. That landed harder than legal terminology. Margaret sat down heavily. I cannot believe this is happening at a charity gala. That may be the least important part, Thomas said. Leonard finally spoke after an impressive stretch of anxious silence. From a governance standpoint, what is the actual exposure? Daniel answered with surgical calm. Potential reputational correction, documentation reconciliation, advisory attribution review. Possible negotiated settlement pathways, depending on prior communications. Ethan laughed once. Short. Sharp. Settlement? Over what? Daniel looked at him steadily. You would be surprised what history costs when properly invoiced. That was when Ethan understood the practical dimension. His expression changed again. Claire. Softer now. What do you want? Everyone went quiet. Even Vanessa. Even Margaret. Maybe especially Margaret. Because beneath all the polished language, that was the human center of the room. I thought about the apartment where I cried over cereal. The kitchen where he told me we wanted different things. The gala floor where he tried to have me removed, like an inconvenience in heels. I wanted acknowledgement, I said. Months ago. Ethan looked genuinely tired for the first time. And now. I considered him carefully. Now I want you to understand that humiliating people does not erase what they know. No one spoke. Then Vanessa stood. I am leaving. Ethan turned. Vanessa. No. She grabbed her clutch from the chair. You do not get to manage this conversation too. This is being distorted. Maybe, she said. But I am not interested in marrying a distortion. Margaret closed her eyes. Leonard looked like he needed antacids. Thomas checked his watch because of course he did. Vanessa paused near the door and looked at me. Did he really try to have you removed downstairs? Yes. She looked at Ethan for a long moment. That tells me more than the documents. Then she left. The silence afterward felt heavier than any argument. Ethan rubbed his forehead. This has gone too far. Daniel responded calmly. That usually means reality arrived ahead of schedule. Thomas requested a formal follow-up meeting the next morning. Leonard agreed. Margaret declined eye contact with anyone. One by one, the room began dissolving. Until eventually, only Ethan and I remained near the windows while Chicago glittered below us like nothing had changed. Claire, he said quietly, please do not walk away like this. And for the first time in years, I realized he was asking, not commanding. The strange thing about finally being heard is that it does not always feel triumphant. Sometimes it just feels quiet. Ethan stood a few feet away from me in the executive lounge. No audience left to impress. No polished girlfriend beside him. No board members buffering reality with corporate vocabulary. Just the man I had once built a life with and the woman he had underestimated. Please do not walk away like this, he said again, softer this time. I looked at him for a long moment. Like what? He exhaled slowly. Like I am some kind of villain. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. Even now, he wanted narrative control. Ethan, I said, you tried to have me removed from a public event. I was angry. You were comfortable. That landed. There is a difference. He looked away toward the skyline. I did not know how much Daniel was involved. That is your concern? No, the pause said otherwise. Claire, I handled things badly. Tonight. Everything. That word hung between us. I had imagined this moment once. An apology. Regret. Recognition. In those fantasies, I thought it would heal something. Instead, I mostly felt tired. Do you know what the worst part was? I asked. He looked back at me. It was not the divorce. He said nothing. It was how easily you rewrote our history. Like I had just been background support in your success story. Like the woman who stayed up editing your investor decks at midnight was just decorative memory. That is not fair. No, I said calmly. What was not fair was making me feel invisible in a life I helped build. He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly looking older than I remembered. I was under pressure. Everyone is under pressure. I made mistakes. Yes. He stepped closer, cautious now, as though confidence had become unreliable. I did love you. Past tense. Interesting. Maybe, I said. In the version of love that only works when one person stays smaller. His expression tightened. That is not true. Is it not? Silence answered for him. Claire, he said after a moment. If I could do things differently. But you did not. He swallowed hard. Do you hate me? Such a human question. Such a late one. I considered it honestly. No, he looked almost relieved. That would require carrying you with me. I stopped doing that. The words were not cruel. Just true. He nodded once, absorbing it. So this is it. I glanced toward the door where Daniel had quietly given us space, without making it theatrical. This was it a long time ago, I said. Tonight just made it visible. I started toward the exit, then paused. Do you know the real price you paid? He looked at me, saying nothing. It was not money. Not reputation. Not legal exposure. You lost the ability to be remembered kindly by the person who once knew your best self. His face changed then, not dramatically, just enough. Real regret often looks smaller than movies promise. I walked toward the door where Daniel waited with patient professionalism and something like respect. Behind me, Ethan did not try to stop me. For the first time in years, he understood that losing control and losing someone are not the same thing. Sometimes the second happens long before you notice.